Hello, everyone, and welcome to PAEA's second webinar. Tonight, Karen Rosenburg will speak about inclusion strategies for students with autism spectrum disorder. Registered participants will receive a Google form link via email in a day or two to fill out for their 1 hour of Act 48 credit. Before we begin the webinar, we are asking participants to mute their microphones and keep their video off. Those controls are located in the bottom left corner of the controls bar. We are also asking everyone to sign in the chat role. Please use the same name in which you registered for this event. The chat role can be found along the bottom in the controls bar as well. Signing in will ensure that you receive the Act 48 link. So again, we are now ready to hear about inclusion strategies for students with autism spectrum disorder from Karen. So Karen, take it away.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen here for me a second. Oh, and of course, it is not at the beginning because I was testing it out before. So let me fix this. Okay, here we go. Oh, there we go. All right, good. Everybody can hear me okay? Okay, so this is my second webinar, first one for PAEA, so bear with me if I end up doing something wrong, and I'll try to fix it. So this is inclusion strategies for student with autism spectrum disorder. This is a presentation that I gave at the PAEA conference this year. Again, my name is Karen Rosenburg. I'm the visual arts and ceramics teacher at New Hope Soulbury High School in New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is in Bucks County. And I'm also the special needs and art education chair for PAEA. And so the reason why I'm very interested in teaching students with autism, really students with special needs. I teach in a regular high school, but I do teach a number of students with special needs, from just students who have that need academic support to students who are really, I have a couple students that are only included just in my class. And so I have a wide variety of students, like most people probably do in their school. But for this presentation, we're going to concentrate on students with autism. The latest CDC record states that 1 in 59 students in the United States are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And that is new as of last April. It's a newer statistic. And one of those students is actually my child. And this is Marcus over here. He is 11 years old, and he is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when he was 4. And he is like an equestrian rider, and this is his little autism service dog, Pax. And Pax is very famous. He comes to school with me, and he works in a therapy dog situation. Marcus is also a triplet, and this is his brother, Owen, and sister, Nora. I couldn't leave them out. So the goals for this webinar are, we're going to talk about successful inclusion, what that looks like, successful inclusion versus what just inclusion is, how to read an IEP and reevaluation report and why that's pretty necessary, how to set expectations for behavior, how to adapt lessons and materials, and how to develop collaborative relationships with special education teachers and assistants. So before we get into any of that stuff, I think that the most important thing when working with students with special needs is thinking about taking on a growth mindset. So a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and you probably have heard of this type of way of thinking before, but it's very important. So with a growth mindset, you're always thinking that things can get better and improve. You say things to yourself like, I can change, this is difficult, but it'll get better. And I know this student can do this and I can help this student, instead of saying to yourself, oh, I've been doing it this way for years and it's too hard and this student won't learn anything, or I don't have time to do this. So really kind of adapting that growth mindset before heading off in any kind of direction working with a special needs student is a good thing. And this is one of my favorite quotes. Everybody is a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. And I've always thought that Albert Einstein said that, but I heard that that's probably not Albert Einstein that said it, but it's still a good quote. So the difference between, so what inclusion is, a lot of people confuse inclusion with mainstreaming, and I hear a lot of people talk about mainstreaming still. Mainstreaming really isn't a term that is used anymore, and mainstreaming just kind of refers to the fact that a student with special needs is educated in the same building that other people are. It could just mean that they were like had their own classroom and they stayed in that classroom and they never came out. And I certainly taught I've been teaching for 23 years and I've taught in buildings, you know, back in the day that were just like that. And then they decided to, you know, want their students to kind of leave that classroom and go out into the school and join with the other kids in their classes, and they didn't give teachers any kind of training on how to do this. So what happened was that students usually ended up in the art classroom sitting together at their own table with all of the aides in the corner. The teacher maybe didn't know how to teach them or what to teach them and gave them the exact same project as everybody else, or gave them something that was not really appropriate for them. And so, excuse me, that's kind of what we think about as inclusion. Successful inclusion is a little bit different. So successful inclusion does, you want to make sure students feel like they're a part of the classroom. They're just like every other student that's in there. When they're in your room, they sit among the other students in the class and are expected to interact with them. They don't necessarily have to sit at the same tables. If it's at all possible, I try to spread my students out. If I get students in my classroom, my school has an autism support classroom. And if I have students that come here from autism support, I try to kind of spread them out through the classroom and make sure that they don't sit at the same table. Sometimes they want to sit at the same table because that's how they feel comfortable doing that, because those are the people that they've been with for, you know, however many years they've been in school. But I tried to get them to kind of spread out a little bit so they're sitting with other students and interacting with other students just like any other kid would. And also a part of successful inclusion is that students participate in the same projects that are modified and educationally and grade level appropriate. So whenever I give my students a project, I try to make every single student in that class try to do almost the same thing. They don't have to necessarily look the same when they're finished, but we're going to try to use the same materials. The goals are going to be, you know, slightly the same, and they're going to be grade level appropriate. So if I have a student that doesn't have any kind of fine motor skill issues, and we're using pencils to draw, then that student is going to get a pencil to draw. I'm not going to give them a fat marker or anything like that. If they can use a pencil, that's what they're going to use. So they use whatever is age and developmentally appropriate. And I even had a student that would come into my classroom who liked drawing like little kid cartoons. He would continue to watch cartoons on TV, and they were like for little kids. Like I taught him around the same time my kids were like 5 and 6, so they ended up watching the same stuff on TV, and he would come to my class and want to draw those characters, and I was trying to get him to not draw those characters because, you know, when you're 17 or 18 and you're in art class with everybody else, let's try to, like, you know, think about what 17 and 18-year-olds are drawing in your art class. And all students are treated equitably. And equitably does not mean the same. oops. It means that they all get what they need in order to succeed. So instead of giving every single kid the exact same thing, that might not help some students, that might help some students who don't need that help. We're going to give them the things that they need in order so that they can all reach the same level. And so that's what I try to think about when I am teaching these kids in my class. So the first thing that I think is a good thing to do when teaching students with autism is to really read the IEP. All teachers are required, legally required, to read and implement the IEP. But, you know, not just to see what is on the IEP and what the special design instructions are, but I think that the IEP contains a lot of information that is really, really good information. If you know where to find it and you know what to look for, you can learn a lot about a student just by reading it real quick. And instead of trying to like figure out or talk to their special ed teacher, I mean, you can do those things too. But I think reading an IEP and knowing what to look for is a really good idea. So IEPs are legal documents. Every teacher is required to follow them. They're given to students who are required individualized instruction. They're updated every year, but they are fluid, so they can change throughout the year. And every time that they are changed, you should be notified about that. Everybody should have access to them. If you don't have access to a student's IEP, then you need to talk to somebody in your school about that, a special ed teacher or even the principal, because you're required to read those. They have a list of goals and accommodations on them. And anyone can, oh, and at the bottom I wrote, anyone can request an IEP meeting. So even if a student has an IEP and you think that something needs to be changed, you can go and talk to the special ed teacher and you can ask for an IEP meeting. You might just be able to talk to them about the IEP and they might just be able to make changes without a meeting. But you as a teacher have a right to request an IEP meeting. I don't think that this was the next slide. It wasn't. Okay, so the places to look for helpful information on an IEP. When you look at an IEP, I think it's like on the 3rd page, it'll state a reason for the IEP. You have to read it very carefully because it won't necessarily say what a student's diagnosis is, and things can be kind of vague on it. But when you read it, you'll kind of get a sense of why they need it. And if you want to know a little bit more about that, you can certainly ask their special ed teacher. All students with IEPs have a special ed teacher that is their caseworker, and that is the person who is responsible for writing the IEP. And so you can certainly go talk to that person about it. Also, it has accommodations and goals on it and present lab. So accommodations and goals are good to read because you want to know why that student is there. I have a lot of students whose goals in class are to socialize with other kids in class, and that's it. That's what their academic goal is. They want to be able to be in class. I have a student who's nonverbal and who uses a communication, like an iPad, an app on an iPad to communicate. And her goal is to come to class and communicate with the students in her class with the iPad, and that's fine. And so so I tried to build my lessons around that goal to make sure that that goal is being met in my classroom while she does artwork. And the accommodations are important because, again, if it says in the IEP that you're supposed to be implementing that in a regular ed classroom, then that should be something that you're doing in the class. The other thing that's good to look for are present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. There are many, many paragraphs probably written by parents and teachers, therapists. It'll have their social skills, their reading and math levels. All of those things are super important when designing instruction for students with autism, especially if you have them read stuff. And I just gave out my students a reading a reading assignment, and I had to check to make sure what reading level that they were all on, so I could make sure that they were going to be able to read it, or I could have a buddy read it to them, or they only had to read a part of it. But this has really good information, especially parent input and teacher input. You can see kind of what they're doing in other classes, maybe what teachers in other classes are doing to help them out in their class. And so I always, this is, I think, the meat of the IEP that tells you the most information about them. And this kind of shows you also part of, this is one of my students' IEP. I blocked out all of his name, so you won't know who it is. But it tells you like what they're doing. Social skills, I put this in here because you can see here, it says that, darn it, hold on a second. Wait, what is happening here? There we go. Okay. So here it says that social skills, he's learning about the zones of regulation, and the zones is a systematic behavior approach to teach self-regulation. So if you're having problems with a kid and his behavior in class or her behavior in class, you know, I could look at this IEP and say, oh, okay, well, the zones, okay, so that works for them. So now I need to figure out what the zones of regulation are so I can use them in my classroom. Because if he's using them somewhere else, he already knows what that's about, and I can just implement that in my classroom, and then we're not starting from zero and reinventing the wheel. It's something that he already knows about. And again, you can ask the special ed teacher that is implementing that about it. This is kind of what something that I write in for IEPs. I'm always asked to give information about my students for IEPs. I always write a lot. As a parent who sits on the other side of the table during an IEP meeting, I like to read. You know, I want to see a lot of information about my kid, and especially if that kid is really good in your class and does a lot of really great stuff. You know, parents really like hearing about that, because not everything that you hear about is great. And also, real quickly, there's also something called a reevaluation report, and that's given every 3 years. You have access to it, but you're not legally required to watch it, but it has a lot of really, really, really good information in it, and it gives you a really good, accurate picture of what a student is like. So if you really want to find out more about a student that you're having some issues with teaching, you could ask their caseworker about the reevaluation report. I used to have open access to them, and then they changed the system at my school, and now I can't like just click on it and read it whenever I want. So, which is unfortunate, but okay. So, setting expectations for behavior using visual resources. So, understanding and responding to behavior. So this was from my friend Susan. She used this in one of her presentations. So there's 3 types of behavior that you will usually see from students with autism, and that's anxious behavior, oppositional behavior, and withdrawn behavior. And so these are some of the things that you can do to help with those behaviors. For anxious behavior, you can build a relationship with them. We want to do that with all of our students. Help them understand that the classroom is a safe space. Avoid responses that reinforce escaping. So I have a good story about this. My son, when he was in 4th grade, he did not like 4th grade for whatever reason. He didn't like his classroom. He liked his teacher. I don't know. It was very loud. There were a lot of kids in there. And so he would go to the bathroom all the time, and they would lose track of him, and he would end up being in the bathroom for like 20, 30 minutes, sometimes 45 minutes in 4th grade. And so when you allow students to leave your room, you're kind of giving them that escape route that they are looking for. So we want to try to contain them in the room to help deal with their anxious behavior, so it'll lessen their anxious behavior over time. So if they are anxious and they need a break, try to provide a break in the classroom and maybe a separate space in the classroom. Some teachers I see have cool down spaces in their classroom, or like a carpet on the floor with a beanbag chair, with some sensory activities that you can do, but try to keep them in the classroom so that they're not being able to leave and not come back. And for exposure, start with small increments and build exposure. I have a lot of students with sensory issues, and so this is that kind of falls underneath of this. When you have sensory issues, things that smell or taste or feel weird give you a lot of anxiety. And so to break that down, you can't just shove it all at them at one time. You have to do it in small increments. A really good example of this is I teach ceramics. So I have a lot of kids with autism show up in my ceramics class, and they don't want to touch the clay because it's wet and it's gross and it's dirty, and they don't want any of that. So I actually buy Model Magic, and I have them start using the Model Magic because the Model Magic has like a really cool texture to it. It's not messy. It doesn't smell. It doesn't leave any kind of residue, but it still has that same kind of texture and consistency of clay. And so if they can kind of manipulate that Model Magic for a little bit, sometimes it's the whole entire class. And then the next class they come in and they do it for 15 minutes, and then maybe they'll touch clay for like 5 minutes. And then the next time, maybe it's only 10 minutes with the Model Magic and a little bit more time. And so you're gradually increasing that exposure time by starting out with something that they like and kind of replacing it with something that is similar. For oppositional behavior, you always want to avoid yes or no questions because you'll get the answer that you probably didn't want. Make sure you give them time for compliance. If they don't give you an answer right away, it sometimes feels very awkward to wait 5 minutes for a response, but sometimes you have to give it. You have to set limits that are simple, clear, reasonable, and enforceable, because that's what makes sense to kids with autism. And it has to be, it has to be consistent as well, and give choices. But don't give too many choices. 2 or 3 are good. If you give more than that, then it gets too confusing. And withdrawn behavior, I can't see the side of my screen. Oh, wait a second, hold on. I'm trying to move my bar here. So withdrawn behavior, you want to give open-ended, flexible assignments based on interest. An example of this is I just had a project where we had to think about a machine that makes your life better, and we drew part of it and we kind of broke it down into different shapes, and then we painted it. And I have a student who loves monsters, is obsessed with them, and so he didn't want to draw anything but a monster. And we sat down with him and said, okay, well, how do you know about monsters? Where do you find out about them? And he's like, oh, well, I watch them on TV or on my computer screen. And and then we're like, well, that's a machine. You could draw that machine, and maybe, on the display, you can draw a monster. And he was totally into that. So he was very hesitant at first because it had to be about a monster, and we were able to get him to do the project the way that it was supposed to be, but make it interesting for him. Avoid overhelping, because a lot of students will completely take advantage of that. Avoid constant positive feedback and reinforcement. Sometimes I'll tell my son, oh, you know what, that looks really great. And he'd be like, no, it doesn't. It doesn't look great. But if I talk to him about what I like about it, specific things I like about it, he's more into it. And build teacher and peer relationships. All of my, I love all of my students, but I have a special place in my heart for those kids, and we have a really good time together in class. So they love coming to my class. Okay. So some of the things that will help with behavior are kids with autism love structure and routine. So these are some examples of things that you could use in your class. So the first thing is a picture exchange communication system, or PECS it's called. You can usually find these little pictures online and print them out and laminate them. And then usually they're used with like Velcro on the back. And then you can move them around. And I've used this in the past for some of my students, even for my own son. Sometimes kids will come to school with them, come to your class with them. I've taught, when I taught elementary school, I had a lot of students that would come with them. And so you could make a chart up with whatever that you needed to with the PEC system, like supplies that you need for that day, colors that you're going to use. You could have this whole thing on a chart, and then the student has a little card and they can go over and be like, well, I'm going to use green and put it on their card, and I'm going to use black, put it on their card, and I'm going to use markers and put that on their card. And then that way they know they have, you know, their brain is set up to understand, okay, this is what's on my card, this is what I need to get, and that's what I'm doing today. Okay, provide a visual reference for behaviors with text and pictures, provide students a copy. So I do this for a lot of my students that I have in high school. Not necessarily rules for school, but I'll do like rules for the classroom or even rules for a specific project. Sometimes I'll do the rules, and I had one student in ceramics who loved clay, and he just wanted to like rub it all over himself every single time he came to class. So I had to make a little rules sheet for him, and I laminated it. And all of my students have toolboxes, so I give them all their ceramic tools and they keep them in their toolbox. And so when he flipped the lid up, those rules were right there. So he knew every single time he came to class and put that box down and looked at the rules, you know, rule number 1 was don't rub clay all over your body. And so he was able to read that every single time he sat down and knew, okay, I can't do that. And so it does work. And you can do it just for general rules for the classroom or for really anything that you need them to follow. Okay, and a visual schedule. This is also really good, and I've also used this for my own kid and students at school. And so it's a to-do and all done list. So you put the steps of the project in order, and every time they do something and they complete a step, they take it off of the to-do list and they stick it on the all done list. And then that way they know, they get halfway through it and they're like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And you can say, no, look, there's still 2 more things here. We need to be able to move that over. And so it, a lot of times will help them get back on track and be able to see, okay, now I still have a couple more steps to do. Instead of, if you don't have something like this, it's a little bit more abstract in their mind, like, well, I don't know what to do yet because I don't really see it in front of me. And so being able to see those steps and understand what they are and be able to visually and physically kind of like take it off and move it over and know that you're finished with that. And then there's token economy, you know, a reward for doing what you need to do in class. You know, this could be laminated and you use a whiteboard marker on it that you can erase off. I have had students where I take bingo chips and I have like a plastic card with the Velcro, and all the bingo chips are on one side, and there's what they're working for goes on the bottom, and they, every time they're on task, you take a bingo chip off the front, stick it on the, take the bingo chip off the back, stick it on the front, and when they fill up all the things, and they get whatever their reward is. I actually have, so I bring my dog to school with me, and I have a student whose token economy for another class is to come pet PAX, so, who is my dog. And so if he gets all of his, you know, chips or whatever for that class, he's allowed to come to my class and pet the dog, which is, you know, my dog loves it. And then this is a contingency map as well. It's kind of like, you know, token economy sort of, but, you know, it tells, it allows the student to see what happens if they don't make the right choices and the 2 areas that they can end up in. Okay, so moving on to adapting lessons and materials. I'm trying to stay on track here. Okay. So a really good way of adapting lessons and materials is to follow universal design for learning. Universal design for learning is a great way to kind of set up your curriculum because it helps all students achieve at their own level. And the 3 areas of UDL are representation, action, and expression and engagement. You could really do like an entire separate presentation on UDL. You could probably teach an entire graduate level course in UDL. Basically, the way that I see UDL is just taking that one project and trying to splinter it into different ways of how different students in my class can have success doing that project a little bit differently. And that's okay. Giving choices, being able to differentiate the assessments, having a different type of rubric for certain students, all of those things are helpful and kind of fall under UDL. And these are 2 really good books. So I highly recommend both of them to learn a little bit more about UDL and try to apply that into your classroom. And both of these books have chapters in them on how to implement them in an art class. But really, you can really kind of look at the things that they talk about and kind of picture how it would work in your classroom as well. One of the ways I have a student teacher, and we were just talking about this on how that machine lesson that we did, where they had to draw the machine and then they had to paint it in. So my student that is nonverbal, she has a lot of fine motor deficits, and so the way that we went about that project was I had her, I looked at her communication board and I looked at like the kitchen and there was like lots of machines on there. So I had her pick one out. And so she picked a toaster. So I printed out a picture of a toaster and I took a hot glue gun and I traced the toaster with the hot glue gun. And then I took a piece of paper and put it over top, and she took a oil pastel and rubbed it all over top. And that was like the texture rubbing of the toaster. So you could see the toaster on the paper, and then she just took paint and painted over top of it. And so it didn't look exactly like the other kids' projects, but she followed almost the exact same steps as everybody else's project and was still able to kind of come out with the same type of product in the end. So, okay, so any adaptive or differentiated lessons and projects should be meaningful, age appropriate, and the students should be able to do the majority of the work independently. Okay, I could have very well drawn that toaster for her and given it to her to paint in, but I think the fact that she got a blank piece of paper to put it over top of that and her mark making made that toaster appear meant a lot to her. So it does require a little bit more effort, but I think maybe it took me like 5 minutes to do that. So it was totally worth it. And meaningful and age appropriate. Again, nothing cartoony, especially for a high school kid, or like, you know, anything that an elementary school kid would do. I try to kind of stay away from my high school kids and try to, you know, show them that they can 100% use the same materials that everybody else in the class is using. Okay, so some adaptive materials that I use. Here's the Model Magic that I love. I also have do-a-dot markers for painting. I think that they work really well. They're kind of like bingo markers, and they have the paint in it. And you squeeze it, and the paint comes out the bottom. I have adaptive scissors at the bottom. Scissors where like one student can hold it, and then you hold the back, and you help them cut, or if they can only cut with one hand. Frog tape is also good. You can put it down on the paper and they can paint over top of it, or if they need to paint inside of something, you can create like a stencil and put it down and tape it down to the paper, and they can paint the stencil, and then the frog tape won't tear the paper. And wiki sticks are really great. They are like a long piece of wax, and I like to use them a lot because you can use them very sculpturally, but you can also use them kind of like in a 2D way to kind of draw on a piece of paper. They'll stick to paper. And then they actually, if you kind of ball them up enough, they'll turn into like a big ball of wax that students can kind of squeeze in and manipulate. And they like that too. Also, if you want to, if you're interested in learning more about adaptive materials, if you go to the Special Needs and Art Education Facebook group, there is a file. I think they actually have 2 files there that have a ton of adaptive materials listed, but that different types of teachers use that have contributed to this file over like the past 2 years. So that's a really good resource. So working collaboratively with special education teachers and paraprofessionals. I'm actually going to do an entire presentation just on this at Kutztown University in April with a friend of mine who is a paraprofessional that I work with. My school, we call them instructional assistants. So if you're going there, you'll find out more about this. I always try to become friends with the special education teachers because being friendly with them actually helps me do my job a lot easier. And so I try to make their job a little bit easier too. So if I can show them, hey, I'm going to help you out, they are more likely to help me out. Does that always work? No, there are special ed teachers in my school that I don't quite jive with, but you know, I try really hard. So you want to help make their job easier. I do that by providing a lot of feedback to them about what works in my classroom, and then maybe what I'm struggling with, and then maybe they can give me some suggestions. And I also try to address all of those issues all of the issues that students are having in my classroom. I don't ever try to push it off on the special ed teacher. I always say, like, I want to be able to help this kid in my classroom, not you come here and you try to help this kid in my classroom. And I provide them a lot of student feedback. They ask me for input on the IEPs. I attend so many IEP meetings. Last week I attended 2, the week before I attended 3. Because they know that they can count on me for a good, you know, a good blurb for the IEP, and ask to continue classroom supports. Oops. Okay, and paraprofessionals. I like to encourage the buddy system. I don't like to have the instructional assistant breathing down the kid's neck the entire time. So I try to pair up my kids with other kids at the table, and try to have their peers help them out instead of always having to rely on the instructional assistant. The other thing that I would like everybody to remember is that instructional assistants are colleagues. They don't work for you. You are not their boss. And so I try to, you know, treat all of the instructional assistants that I work with as a colleague, as a professional that I'm working alongside with, and we're there to help each other out. I always demo to the instructional assistants what that they should be doing with the students. So I don't show the students I show the students what to do when I'm showing everybody what to do, but then I'll go over and speak specifically with the instructional assistant and say, okay, during this class, this is what I need you to do with this student. And then that gives them expectations on what they need to do for the entire class. I know that this is an area where I'll get a lot of people telling me, oh, they just, you know, they'll sit in the corner, they'll sit on their phone. But I think that if you give them specific things to work on each class period, then they'll know what to do and not have to try to guess about it and, you know, pull out their phone and look on it. And then stress to them that the project belongs to the student and perfection is not necessary. This can be difficult, and I struggle with this too. I have an instructional assistant that fancies himself quite an artist, and so he wants to always kind of take over a kid's project, and I call him out on it all the time. And so a lot of times I will give him his own materials to use, and I ask him, you know, you're going to do this project and your student is going to watch you do it. So you're going to demo it to the student. And that seems to work pretty good. Did I skip one? I didn't. Okay. Final thought. So Rome was not built in a day. You have to start somewhere and focus on one thing at a time. You can do it. I am not a, you know, I don't spend every single minute of the classroom, like that I'm in the classroom worrying about, like, you know, differentiating instruction and, you know, what am I doing? I don't do that all, you know, that's not me all the time. I definitely have days where I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to do today? You want to paint? Here's some paper, here's some paint, go ahead. You know, and that's okay. You don't have to be like super teacher every single day, or drive yourself crazy. And you also don't have to say to yourself, well, I've got to do all of this all at once. That's kind of, you know, you're going to drive yourself crazy doing that. So if you can just think of like either just one student that you want to work with, and think about how you might, you know, present information to that student differently, maybe this coming week, then that's good. If you just want to think about one class, then that's good too. Or if you just want to, you know, just take it little tiny steps at a time. And once you get more and more experience with different things that work, you know, you put that in your pocket, and you know, that continues to grow, and then all of a sudden you have all of these great things that you do in your classroom to help out all of these kids. So it's not something that happens overnight. And so I want to talk about some professional organizations and resources that are really great for working with students with autism. So the first thing I would say is that you should join the NAEA, PAEA Special Needs and Art Education Special Interest Groups. And on Facebook is primarily, I believe, how we communicate. I'm not a big Twitter person. I have a Facebook page for PAEA Special Needs and Art Education. I also have a Instagram, but I would say most of the information that I post is on Facebook. NAEA also has their own Facebook group, Special Needs and Art Education. And that's really great because, like I said, there's lots of resources on there. They give out grants. There's lots of speaking engagements that are posted, webinars. And if you ever have a question, you can always kind of like post a question to the group, and people will respond to you and give you some feedback on whatever your questions happen to be. Another a good organization is the Kennedy Center VSA International Organization on Arts and Disability. I belong to that organization as well, and I've done presentations at their conferences, and they are great. It's a lot of research-based stuff, and and also includes a lot of performing arts such as dance and theater. But that's a really good resource. And also the Council for Exceptional Children's Division of Visual and Performing Arts. So the Council for Exceptional Children is a very large organization that encompasses all of special education in the United States. And then they do have that division of visual and performing arts. We call it DARTS. So every year, the Council for Exceptional Children has a huge conference. I went to that one last year. It's enormous, but they do have people that go there to speak specifically on visual and performing arts. And there's a lot of really great content. As well as this summer, they are accepting articles for publication in their fall newsletter. So it's got the Council for Exceptional Children is just going to concentrate just on visual and performing arts for their fall newsletter. So they're looking for people to write things to contribute to that. So that would be great if we could get people from this area in there. And then my last plug is the second International Conference on Disability Studies, Arts and Education. And that's October 3rd to the 5th. More College of Art, I spelled more wrong. 2 O's and 1 R. So the first International Conference on Disability Studies, Arts, and Education was in Finland 2 years ago. And I went and spoke at that with a bunch of other people from MORE. And it was really, really interesting. Met lots of people from all over Europe to find out what special education looks like in art rooms all across Europe. And so this year they're coming here, and it's going to be in Philadelphia. So it would be a really good idea to go there, and you get to meet a lot of really cool people from all over the world. I am also going to be presenting at NAEA this year. I'm going to be presenting on Saturday morning, and I'm going to present my thesis that I wrote while getting my master's at MORE, and that is on using therapy dogs in the art classroom with students with autism spectrum disorder, which I also presented at PAEA this past year. So. And that's it. That's Pax. That's him in my classroom, hanging out with one of my students. So if you have any questions, let me see if I can figure out how to get back to that chat. You can also email me if you ever have any questions at karenrosenburg@nhsd.org. And then this is the link for this presentation. So I think if I go to stop share, and then I go to chat, I'm trying to figure this out. And there are okay, so there aren't any questions. Oh wait, here we go. Jess.
There you go.
Where do you find the pictures for your visual references for your students? Example 18 and 19. So I think like on all the pictures, it has like the website from where I found them. Let's see if I can make it back there. 18 and 19. Oh, of course, Adapting for Autism. So I think that's the website, adaptingforautism.com. And that's where I found it. All right, let me see if I can go back. And I believe, even though the other one doesn't have it, I believe it's the same place that I found it. Okay. Wait, okay. I lost the Zoom. Here we go. Wait, did you guys see that when I went back? Did I share it? I think I did. No, I didn't. Hold on a second. Figuring this out. Okay, there it is. Here we go. Because it was this one. And then let me hit present. My computer is very slow. Come on. There it is. Okay, so Adapting for Autism. And I think it's it's adaptingforautism.com is the place where I got that at. I think one of them was mine. All right, cool. Is that a free resource? You know what? I don't know. But you know what? We are all pretty crafty people. And so I don't see how it would be really hard to make something like that. Like I make stuff like that all the time. The PECS system, those little pictures, they're kind of universal. And sometimes that is actually a resource that you have to pay for. It's the woman who developed PECS. You can buy books and photocopy them, or you can download files off of the internet, but you do have to pay for them. But if you have a special ed teacher that works with PECS, they can probably provide a lot of that, those images for you. And I know with my student that is on a communication device, she kind of uses like a digital version of PECS. And so I actually worked with the speech therapist, and we have like an entire page that is just art related things. So we were able to kind of like put that together. So when she comes to art class, any type of thing like painting and cutting and cleaning up and all of that stuff is all on that page that I can like digitally organize it for her. Yeah, so you know, check with your special ed teacher, or you know, you could just draw them up yourself and you know, laminate them and cut them out, and you know, get some of the Velcro stuff. You know, it's real easy. What was the link to your slideshow, and are you okay with sharing with our colleagues? Of course you can share with our colleagues, and I think, let's see, it's tiny URL something. Let me go back. Oh, come on. Nope. Here we go. Can you see it? My little chat bar is kind of covering it up. Oh, okay. It's tinyurl /PAEA autism. Come on, go away. There it is. Okay. All right, let's go back up here. And that is it. Does anybody else have any questions?
Please feel free to use the chat role and ask questions. She's the expert.
And like I said, you can always, you know, email me, or you can find me on Facebook. I'm one of the moderators for PAEA Special Needs in Art Education. You can always contact me, like message me through there, through Instagram, whatever. So thank you to everybody who joined us on the second PAEA webinar. This is pretty cool. I enjoy doing this, and all of you should volunteer to share your expertise on a webinar in the future. And so I enjoyed spending time with you, and I'm very excited to go watch Rent on TV now.
All right, well, with all that said, I just would like to say we really hope that everybody did enjoy their time with us tonight. Please make sure that you have signed in on the chat roll to verify your participation in tonight's webinar. Please make sure you use the same name in which you register so that we can match that up. Remember to check your email for the Act 48 link coming in the next day or two. Another webinar for February is in the works. It looks like the topic is going to be Artist in Residence programs presented by Jess Knoll. So definitely look for that registration link on the PAEA Facebook page, the PAEA website calendar, or in an email from your region or division rep. So unless there are any more questions, we're going to call that a wrap, and I will leave this open a few minutes for everybody to find the chat roll. If you hover down around the bottom of your screen, the chat roll should be down below around the middle. It says chat with a little speech bubble. If you find that and click on that, you can sign in with your first and last name, and we will make sure that you get the Act 48 link. So Karen, you are free to flee and go watch Rent, and I will sit here for a few minutes to give everybody some time for the chat roll. Thank you.
Bye, thanks.